Hello everyone, a warm welcome from Museum and History New South Wales. We're going to have a little romp in a record series type that doesn't get a lot of airplay in history. We haven't shown this sort of thing before, so we're going to be looking at records that have just seen the light of day, and you're going to be the beneficiaries of that. The topic for today is shipwrecks and coastal records. In the spirit of reconciliation, MHNSW acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Now, we are taking a deep dive, so to speak, ladies and gentlemen, for the coastal records. And I'm going to giving you a bit of an overview, the highs, the lows, and the in-betweens, but also I'm going to give you strategies for actually getting beneficial gains out of looking at these records. And I'll give you an overview of the whole thing. So let's launch. Part one is outport shipping. Now, I added this as a slide because we had an email from a lady asking about the Clarence River. So I thought I'd give this as an excuse to show you how to look at your local area if it's something that you would like to do. Now you go onto our main website and then you can search by any key term that you want. In this case, it's Clarence River. And it brings up a series of results. Now I call this, my own thinking, an untidy result because it's going to come up with things, long list, some of it's useful, some of it's not useful. So I'm going to show you how to sort it. What I noticed from the get-go though, is that we have a series of oyster culture lease files here. So for anybody involved in the oyster lease farming in the Clarence River area, look at this, a treasure trove waiting for you. Now to sort them into some sort of a useful order, we need to tweak results. And so I'm going to go to that right panel now. And when I expand it so we can see all the different series, I can now make really good choices over what I would like to look at. Now, for the sake of today's topic, coastal records, the oyster files are there. There's 110 of them in total, and they're grouped by time periods, not 110 people either. It's a little treasure trove right there. But we've also got this, and I found this when I was preparing for the talk. It's negatives of plans and ships and plants built at the dockyard. So when we go in, I picked this one out for using as an example. It's the Clarence River Ferry Ship 64 deck plan. We go into what we call the item page here, and we see we've got a thumbnail. So just get into the habit of clicking that thumbnail and you get to see the record in its entirety. It means it's scanned, it means it's available to you online. And what we get, well, now I'm going to hand over to the people who are more interested in the shipping side of things, the plans and so forth, to appraise this. But what I thought it would be very interesting to show today, to show you the depth and variety of records that you can find when you just do things like tweak your results and have a look. Okay, so, it gives you the sense of what the ship was like and how it was built. This is a Clarence River photograph. You can also find photographs using the same methods. So now we'll go for perhaps broadening the view and not using a search term such as Tweed River or something else, but we will now look at it from the point of view of what if I'm just generally looking at local areas, what can I find? And this is an example of what you can find that is relevant to local areas. Now it's the reports on inspections of outports. Now I've never seen this used in the reading room, so I thought I'd give it a bit of a dust off and a show and tell today. Now, if you go to the series description, it gives you a really good sense of what the record is like. It talks about each site being inspected once a year, photographs, maps, and copies of leases, and has an item listing. So what I'm going to do is I went into the reading room for today's talk. I pulled up the item listing, and this is what they look like. Now, as we evolve as an organization, we are putting the item listings online, so you will see these as thumbnails in future times. So it's good to get you into the habit of thinking like us. Now, in this example, let's just say I have a burning need to look at the Tweed River in 1950. I can see that it's in box 7/7552.7, which means in the reading room, I can pull it up. Now, the payoff, I like this opening, by the way. On Monday, the 9th of October, 1950, we left Mascot Aerodrome by airliner. I just find that it puts me there. But it talks about such local details. The person who was in charge of the area, the acting officer in charge, is 52 years of age. He holds a certificate, master, harbour and river steamer and licence as motor boat driver. The interior of the premises, which had recently been painted by the tenant, presented a smart appearance. And there's a deputation regarding dredging. And Mr. Graham, in submitting the present representation, said the main reason for the deputation was the fact that local fishermen have been in the habit of using the council's wharf in Tenora Creek for mooring purposes. So what you get with this kind of thing is that local area detail, that if you're looking for that local area information, we do have these sorts of records in the collection. So what I'm encouraging you to do is to look and to be open-minded to where you might find things. And when necessary, look at item listings. There's an example of a photograph from our collection of the Tweed River. So now we'll look at coastal shipping registers. I've had questions over the years along the lines of, do you have coastal shipping records, which would I'm assuming would mean passenger movements up and down the coast. Unfortunately, our records do not go that far, and I just want to make that very clear in this talk. It's a sense of what it can't do is give shipping lists, but what it can do is give you shipping movements. So this is what we do have, and this little graph sort of says it all, so I'll just let it spin on. As you can see, we have a variety of locations up and down the coast and a variety of time periods, which may reflect the time periods they were busy, but I haven't researched that topic, so I'll leave it to your imagination or for you to do the research. And these are an example of the sort of things we have in that from that list I just created. And I'm just going to pick one reasonably at random. Shipping registers 1900 and 1903 records the comings and goings of vessels. So this is an example from the collection. I'm picking one thing out reasonably randomly. There's a record here of the Prosperity schooner. You can see the SCHR. I love how the Australians are very good at shortening words. Prosperity. And there's an example of a schooner, just so I don't lose anybody on the technicalities. Now, what you can do, if you combine the comings and goings records that we hold and you go to Trove, you can actually flesh in the history of the boat. Take a look at this. I just looked for the schooner Prosperity and I kept in mind the time periods. And look at this. On this occasion, they had 100,000 feet of timber, delay brought about by light airs and a northeast gale. On the same ship, arrival with 100,000 feet of timber, variable winds. Coal transport to Auckland, strong southwest gale. I'm obviously not going through the whole article because of the nature of the talk is an overview, but here we have the inevitable thing that happens when you start transporting coal, a coal explosion while lying in Elizabeth Bay, 3 in hospital. And so what I was hoping to open your mind to is that if you combine two different types of records, you can actually flesh out details. So it's a little bit like creating the skeleton and then looking for the flesh on the skeleton. And Trove, of course, is very, very, very powerful resource. Before pre-TV, things got printed in the newspapers far more detail than they would today. Now we'll look at a second one just for the sake of giving you a good sense of the overview. We're looking at a slightly later period, slightly different handwriting. And we'll look at the Allenwood, which is, I've got a photograph of the vessel here. This is what the Allenwood looked like. And we'll do the same thing. So we have here, the Allenwood ran aground, is breaking up in the surf, 17th of September. 21st December, several tenders have been received for the Allenwood, so it looks like the ship is terminal. And a marine inquiry found that the Allenwood ran aground with unknown causes. Now we'll be looking at those inquiries a little bit later in the talk when we talk about shipwrecks specifically. And finally, the Allenwood sold for scrap. So can you see where I'm coming? If you go from the registers, you can have a timeline, and then if you go to Trove, you can actually flesh in that timeline for a little bit of a history of the boat. And if you have a person of interest who was a crew on the boat, it gives you that sense of what they did and what happened to them as well. We do have records of investigations from the local Marine Board at Newcastle, which I suspect would be the right place to look for the Allenwood's marine inquiry. But unfortunately, notice the years of coverage. Always look for the years of coverage when you start diving in. The coverage doesn't go to 1950, so on this occasion, it wasn't helpful. And we actually have photographs both of the Allenwood at sea and the Allenwood just before it got scrapped, let's say. There it is. beached. Now, the other records we have a variety. We have other records in relation to the outgoings, so I'll leave it to you to explore on your own. If you were interested in any one of these series, just copy the NRS 4727 as an example, put it into collection search, and you'll draw up the information about that series. They, generally speaking, will give you an overview of the series, and they will give you a sense of what you get if you come and have a look at them, and then what format they're in, so you can come into the reading room and have a look. So for you local historians, I hope I've given you some food for thought. These are the records that I don't see very often being used, and I recommend them at the level that I've shown you today. There are other sources for local coastal records. The Maritime Museum has an excellent website and research guides, and if you go down their research guides, you find one on coastal shipping, and it has all sorts of options for you. It talks about the Lloyd Register, it talks about books, very, very good books on coastal shipping, and logs and journal articles. So I won't go farther with this angle because it's the Maritime Museum, but I do recommend if you're interested in the topic, you should go out and have a look. So now we'll get to the main event for today, shipwrecks. Why is it, family historians and local historians, that when things are going along well, the records are very hard to find, but when things go wrong, we can find lots of very interesting things. And that sort of is the theme of the shipwrecking part of this talk. So we're going to take a deep dive into shipwrecks. Always be ready to look into special bundles. Colonial Secretary is the source of letters going to the colonial government. They essentially were all addressed to the Colonial Secretary, even though they were hoping for perhaps going to the governor and going further. And the Colonial Secretary would then vet them and usually respond. So, but what you get with that is an incredible array of New South Wales history. And what they did as an administrative thing is that they had a special topic. They would bundle letters together on that topic and call them special bundles and put them in a certain place in the building. And for us as historians, it is an absolute treasure trove. I'm going to show you an example a little bit later in the talk. We also now have added the Joan Rees index to the main collection, which means that if you search by names in collection search, you will find different sorts of records, including Colonial Secretary's letters. And these are index results only. They're not scanned at this time, but you can buy a copy and you can also come in and have a look. Now, on the subject of shipwrecks, it does support the searching by ship name. Now, this is one some of the main series that we're looking at today, the papers relating to inquiries conducted by the Marine Board. Now, as you can imagine, if a ship was wrecked, it's a very big deal. You're generally speaking going to have loss of life, you've had loss of cargo, you've had loss of the vessel itself, and therefore it is taken very seriously and could potentially go criminal charges for the captain if they have made a serious mistake. So it's a very big deal. And so what it does, like any good court documents, it goes into all the nitty-gritty details. And so I strongly recommend that they're easy to find. I'll show you in a few moments, and they're very easy to enjoy. I'll show you that as well a little bit later in the talk. This is something that I didn't highlight for today's talk, but we also have these series, reports and decisions of inquiries. For my observation, there's a little bit of a sense of summary, but they're available if your particular ship that you're looking for is not in the main series. You can also look here, and I do recommend it. And if looking for a side series becomes difficult for you, don't forget, you can always ring State Archives and ask for advice, and someone like myself will be the person then showing you the extra techniques, which will be to look at the series list, look at the items, see if they're copied, and then possibly come in and have a look. We can also give you a sense of what's in the series. So even if you want to research on something that I have not highlighted in specific, you can do it, and you can do it in the reading room. We also have Admiralty charts, which I find interesting as an idea. Minutes of proceedings of the Court of Marine Inquiry, case papers of the Court of Marine Inquiry, that's, notice the dates, 31 to 73, and decisions of the Marine Inquiry, 1900 to 34 as well. I'm not as interested in the decisions of the Marine Inquiry, but as I say, if you can find case papers, they go further. But if you can't find case papers, that's the sort of place where you can look. So in special bundles of the Marine Board, if you look down at the bottom, it talks about the information leaflet number 17. And I thought it was important to show you that whenever a series description mentions other sources like a bridging aid, we call them in the industry. We have those and we make them available. They will eventually all be available online, but not at the current time. So this is a scan from the records we have in the reading room, and you can see that it gives you a sense of what the record is and what it's about. And so it takes you that little step further. And when it comes to this particular topic, it's very simple to go through looking for one thing. So you can just browse and say that I'm interested in. And so item listings are always a good thing. And in my talk today, I'm actually really encouraging strongly that you learn to think item listings, because that's how you go from the big picture to the little picture to the actual record itself. Now, this is a record series that I did use in my research today, and I strongly recommend. It's extremely well done, and it will flesh out a large majority of shipping records that you can, shipwreck records that you can look into, and it gives you a little potted history on all of them as well. And you can easily transfer from these books into our records if you know what to look for. So now let's take a deep dive into shipwrecks. I've itemized 5 shipwrecks, and when I was making my selections, I was looking into it from the point of view of I wanted you to see different ways of finding records. That's number one. So there's a nice spread of time periods and there's a nice spread of different ways of finding records. And I think in each case, there's a payoff. There's something that is a little bit interesting about this particular ship. So let's have some fun, hey? Now, the first one that we're going to look at is the record of the Stirling Castle in 1836. So this is Old Sydney Town in 1836, and this is a lady called Eliza Fraser. She's the wife of James Fraser, the captain of the Stirling Castle, and they sailed together for Singapore in 1836. As it would have it, they didn't make it because they were shipwrecked. And what's interesting is that Eliza wrote a letter about that shipwreck that goes into incredible details and sent it to the Colonial Secretary. And as you may remember, we can access that information quite easily using our finding aids. So I'll show you in this case how it's done. We can go to online indexes, see for Colonial Secretary. We go to Colonial Secretary. Now on this page, I'm going to be looking at special bundles. Now I strongly recommend that anybody interested in a general history look at special bundles. There are some fascinating subjects in there and possibly the topic of some of my future talks now that I think about it. So we'll go in, we'll just push the page down a little bit so we can see it all. And you can see that they're grouped by years. So you can come in looking for any particular topic, the female factory, for example, and you can look through each special bundles and looking at records they put into special bundles for that time period on that subject, and you'll get a payoff. In this case, we're going to be looking at special bundles covering 1833 to 45, and it takes you through to what is a listing. It's a fascinating read. Honestly, it is a fascinating read, and when you have a sense of they're each created for a specific reason. There's a story to be told from every single file. Now we're going to be focusing on the letter relating to the record of the Stirling Castle. And if I look to the right-hand side, I can see that it's on COD 183 and it's on an SZ 976. So that means that it's been, I noticed that it says removed from a box for security. Interesting. That means that they put the item into the safe store, but not the whole file. But what that means is for you and I, we can access the copy on COD 183, which is a copy of document. Essentially, it's a photocopy that's been published as a book, and this is what they look like. Now, it's perfectly serviceable. It is a copy of the original, and it saves the original from being used, and it saves the original from going out of a secure location as well. So there's all sorts of benefits to the archive. But let's dive into the story. It says here in her own letter about the events, the brig Stirling Castle was commanded by my husband, left Sydney for Singapore on Sunday, 16th of May last. Now, I used this period map to show you the route that they would have taken. And essentially, they sailed up the coast. They went across what we would now call the Queensland border, and then turned in, going further up the coast on their way to Singapore until they hit a reef that's been named after Eliza Fraser, which is Eliza Reef, and they wrecked in the middle of the night. This excellent picture sort of gives you a sense of what happened. From her own views, she says she was in the passage. I was in the passage leading out of the cabin when Captain Fraser came down from, notice, refers to her husband as Captain Fraser, came down from attending to the mooring of the vessel, having given overcharge to Mr. Brown, the first mate. that's kind of handy to give command to the first mate when you wreck. He had been knocked down for more than a minute when the vessel struck. At the first shock of the blow, an exclamation of surprise, and rushed on deck, calling all hands to desist. Seeing it was in vain to again putting her off, he ordered the mast to be cut away to ease the ship. He then came up below and found that the sea was washing through the stern parts and filled the whole place with water. The men, however, a little bit later on, insisted upon launching the longboat in pinnace, the jolly boat having been previously washed away. Now, having read the whole letter, she does go on quite a bit about how the captain, in a sense, had to give in to the crew who were panicking. So I do get the read that she is, in a sense, making her husband look really good as possible, and saying, well, some of the worst decisions he was forced to do. But this is humanity. We have these biases, don't we? Now, retreated the longboat and pinnace, went back to this beach, and this beach is where she landed, and this is what she said about the landing. After proceeding together for 8 or 9 days, we were forced from the leaky state of the boat and the want of water to make for land. We went on shore at an island in the first convenient place we could find. It turns out the island is a sandy island because it's now known as Fraser Island after the captain. I want to say at this point that the people who live on the island, the Butcherella people, don't like the name Fraser. They don't think it's appropriate, but that's something for other authorities to consider in the future time. Now, you can also find a dictionary of biography entry for Eliza Fraser. Now, what I won't be covering on this topic today, we focus on the shipwreck itself, is that she did write quite a lot about the first contact with the Butcherella people, and she depicted them as warlike savages, and that's been widely disputed, even at the time of her publication. So I don't think it's something I want to buy into for today's presentation, because we're looking at shipwrecks. But I thought I'd open your eyes to that, the fact that they were later disputed, and you can form your own opinions and do your own research and think your own thoughts. And this is the can that marks the spot where she was rescued at the end, actually. So we'll go to the second wreck, which is the Dunbar of 1857. Now, the Dunbar, I've turned the lights off for this, was journeying up the coast on a very dark and stormy night, and they thought they saw the North Head, and therefore the captain decided to make a quick turn in. Now, if you can see there on the map, I hope I haven't made it too dark for you, there is very little visibility, and he thought he was going inside North Head. But the trouble is, he didn't do that, and in reality, he brought himself onto South Head down here. He was off course. And so this led to one of the greatest tragedies of Sydney life, which is the wreck of the Dunbar. This is a famous painting depicting the spot at the gap. This is a photograph of the spot where the ship foundered. And just to show you how it was represented in the media of the time, this diagram in a magazine very closely matches our photograph, doesn't it? Isn't it interesting? And it also shows you the problems they had trying to get people out of the surf and get them up onto safety. Now, this is the only person that survived, the only person they fished out. And I just thought I'd show you here, just for a moment, I'd pause the talk and just show you that there are other resources in other places and other museums, and we've got some records held in other places, the Powerhouse Museum and the National Library, that were salvaged from the shipwreck, the Dunbar. Now, if you look further into records of the Dunbar, we have inquest registers. Unfortunately, we don't have the papers. They haven't survived. At that stage of times, they weren't keeping inquest papers because they didn't think there would be a need in the future. Yes, I know, I feel the same way. I heard all of your reactions, but they eventually correct that oversight, and they are all kept today, and they have been all kept since the 1920s. There's 121 souls perished on the wreck at the time, when Sydney numbered about 53,000. So a full inventory of names can be found when they created the inquests, and the inquest didn't create the names. They just, in a sense, they disposed of them as a group. And so here we have the first one, which is Captain Dean, and a few other key people were believed to have perished, and then a large quantity of mutilated remains not identified. They were all shipwrecked. A second entry reports that supposedly shipwrecked in the ship Dunbar. So what's interesting about this record for the Dunbar is that so many, so fast, they couldn't deal with it all. Now they did eventually deal with it. I'll come with that just a couple slides further on. What's interesting to note this stage is that you have other resources when it comes to shipping in general. And we use all the time the log of logs. What's interesting is that you don't look at one volume and you're finished. You need to look at all three because they sort of, in a sense, add more to the story. And this is what they look like. You just look up your ship, which is in this case the Dunbar, and it tells you that there was a Captain Pockley's report on the wreck printed by the Legislative Assembly. Now that's interesting because I can follow that lead and present it today for your talk. Because I go into Trove, I search for the way it was worded in the log of logs, and bingo, there it is. We have the whole document. It's quite long. It goes into incredible detail. So for the sake of a quick presentation and not going for too long, I brought out a part that I thought was quite interesting. This place, however, this is from the Pockley who was looking for bodies. This place, however, gave undeniable evidence of being the repository of a very considerable portion of the vessel and the bodies of the dead. From this locality, I obtained all 11 bodies and placed them in the shells in charge of the police on board the steamer. So this is inside the harbour. So I imagine there must be some sort of a current bringing the records inside. And I also got a sense from reading this in my preparation stage of the carnage that was created by the wreck of the Dunbar. This was cataclysmic for early Sydney. And I just thought I'd pause on that thought for a moment, because if you read this particular article, you'll see where I'm coming from. It was carnage. So much so, they didn't really identify all the bodies, and they couldn't. Interestingly enough, James Johnson lived on to a ripe old age of 78, because we have his photograph in the National Maritime Museum. And also they did identify all the names of the dead. So I mentioned they were fossicking through the shipping lists and trying to identify people who didn't make the voyage, because when they were creating a tomb and they were going to memorialize the names, they did actually create a full listing of the dead, and they sent it to the Colonial Secretary, which is where I found this record. So that part of the story was resolved in the end. We'll go to the Fire King. Now we're going to go into the shipping registers now, and so I'll show you how to look. We go onto the website and we can search by ship name. This is the beautiful thing on this subject, is that we have all the shipping inquiries itemized by name in collection search, so they're very easy to find. Now we go in, there's a number of different results, fire hydrant I noticed down the page, but the first one is the one I'm interested in anyway. So it's the Fire King inquiry regarding the shipwreck in 1873. If I was a little bit more confused, I could go to the right and tweak the results and just look for that particular series. But we've done that, so let's move forward. If you look at the series link, you can have a look at and see what it is. I recommend people get into the habit of always looking at series links. They're extremely well written, and they give you a sense of what's the payoff. Why did these records exist is sometimes relevant, perhaps obvious in this case, but it's sometimes relevant to what you're looking at. And also it'll give you a sense of what's in the records. In this case, everything about the wreck, all the details, subpoenas, transcriptions, notes of evidence, and decisions. Just added this frame for a color. This is 1872 Circular Quay. We'll put it on a period map, and we can then draw forward the position and also the the scan of the Maritime Services Board building at Circular Quay. And this is what it looked like in 1872. Now, this is a record I found inside the file, and it's interesting because it gives you a very good overview. It gives you the date, the steamship Fire King, the captain, your carriers carrying flour, tea, spirits, and soft goods to the value of about £200. And on the 30th at 10 a.m, the steamer Fire King took the bar to come in when a heavy sea broke over the stern, carrying away the wheel and part of the deck house. Before they could steer her, she drove onto the beach. So then, because I think that they would treat these inquiries as sort of like a police investigation until they know better, that's the fundamental report of the inquiry. They're going to go into detail and bring forward a lot of testimony, which I'm going to show you samples of today just for well, let's face it, for the fun of it. Sir, I have the honour to inform you that the steamship Fire King, in coming in yesterday, got on shore on the north side of the bar, has become a total wreck. And although there was a heavy sea at the time, there were no lives lost. I'm your most obedient, humble servant, John Bradley. Now, this is the kind of report that you do get in them, and it gives you a bit of a summary of how the first contact, what they saw, what they thought happened, which is then investigated. Now, this is the William Hersey sworn statement. I'm a holder of a certificate from the Marine Board of New South Wales. Now, I thought this is an opportunity to show the audience, the people listening today, that you can actually always take things a step further. So let's take a look. We actually hold Mercantile Marine Office Registered Seamen engaged aboard ships, 1864 to 1919 on COD 196. So if we get COD 196 and we open it up and we look under H for Hersey, we do in fact find William Oscar Hersey was Service Master Coast, and he was created that on the 23rd of July, 1872, and he was born in Surrey, and he was born on the 23rd of the 3rd, 1833. So notice that just a little bit of alertness. Well, we know now that he was a master. Well, you know, we know he was a master, and so now we can look in to see what records we have of masters, and it turns out we do have records. So these are the kinds of things that you can do when you're doing research, which is that you go through the main line to create the skeleton, but the fleshing comes from a bit of perseverance and experimentation. So we'll go back with a story. In taking the bar, the tiller lay at the flood. She slipped a very heavy sea, which carried away all her steering gear, leaving us quite helpless. Sails were resorted to make way on her and keep her in the channel at the time, and she was taking waterport ship. The sails were no good. We tried to curl the vessel with the sails. She then ran aground. I'm not sure how you feel listening to the story, but that sounds very, very alarming to me. They couldn't steer the ship, and the one method they had didn't really work. On the keel, struck fore and aft, the sails short after hove off the beach, canty ahead to the southeast. The line was then put out to shore. She was held in that position to land passengers. I kept the engines full ahead to save life. What I like about inquests, where you look at reports, and also these series where you look at an inquiry and reports to the inquiry, is that you don't get any secondary information. You don't get just information that you then need to fill in the gaps somehow, some other way. You are getting raw information from eyewitnesses telling their story in incredible detail, in detail that would satisfy any family historian or any local historian. And so I'm very, very enthusiastic to recommend these records for that reason. And we have other records of this sort of thing. Court depositions have the same feel and sound. One report of the Mr. Munro, it was near 3/4 flood and we took the bar. The ebb tide made very soon, and for this, it would immediately take a heaving sea, and the Fire King steered from the bridge instead of the helm. I believe she would have put in safe. I was a crewman on board the Fire King. When she was lost, I was assisting the second mate. I steered her over the bar. The vessel was heading for the bearing mark when she was swamped. I have crossed the bar with the need as sea as there was that day in the same vessel. The level she was lost in consequence of the steering spar being smashed. And reinforced again, I was the chief engineer on board the Fire King when she was lost. The engines did not give way, and the Fire King help were working when the helm, I think, where the vessel was high and dry. I believe the vessel was lost in consequence of the accident with the steering gear. So I think we can all agree that they're all saying that the steering gear was the cause of the accident. So after the investigation, Captain Hersey was exonerated from all blame, as reported in the newspapers and available on Trove in that case. And we can put this to bed. This is approximate position on the Manning River where the ship was ran aground. Next ship is the Queen of Nations. So we do the same technique. We search by the name of the ship. Now I noticed in this case, I'm getting a lot of results of the Queen of Nations coming in and out, in and out. It's obviously a bark that was doing regular voyage, but we can go over here and you can see that there's 10 results of a ship coming in and out in our vessels arrived, but we're interested in the papers relating to inquiries conducted by the Marine Board. Now, in all, there are 506 Marine Board inquiries available to you if you were to do the searching by ship name, and we have those other summary documents when there isn't papers to be found. So we'll take a deep dive and the wreck of the Queen of Nations. Now, she made her last voyage in the 1881. Now we need some context. Part of her cargo consisted of thousands of bottles of spirits and wine. That becomes important later in the story. So keep it in mind. She had thousands of bottles of wine and spirits. Okay, we noted that. Okay, let's do it. Now we'll do another little deep dive into the darkness of the time. This is another case of a ship doing what it can to steer into Sydney Harbour. and to get through those heads on a stormy, dark night. Now, the captain saw a slag heap, which he thought was from Port Jackson's South Head. So he turned in, consistent with that slag heap, only to go onto the shore at Corrimal Beach, just north of Wollongong. He was way, way, way off. And so he literally ran into the reef just before the beach. And so local residents woke up to see this. This is a photograph of the wreck in the approximate position on the beach. And as you remember, there were thousands of bottles. They were spread all over the beach, apparently. The reports describe people as being intoxicated for days and even having food brought down to them so they did not leave the endless party at the beach. I just thought I'd mention that as a bit of fun along the way. So those thousands of bottles found good homes. We'll examine, though, the excerpts from the Board of Inquiry. Now, what you get with these inquiries is oftentimes something like this. It's the telegram saying that the Queen of Nations has been wrecked. She's lost her mainmast and foretop gallant, and also her rudder. 2 boats launched okay, a crew 1, capsized, but no lives lost. So you get these telegrams being sent. Second page, one of the seamen attempted to leave the ship, but was drowned. So the people who went in boats were good. The people who tried to swim drowned. The telegram relating to the summons to the captain, Captain Bachet. The summons for Captain Bachet to appear before the inquiry. I have the honour to request, sir, that a postponement may be granted me on the first instance on account of my slow recovery from illness and injury, and secondly from a desire to be present at the landing of the cargo of the standard bark Queen of Nations, which I previously was master. Now, this was actually heard. I've got a photograph here from the State Library of New South Australia. This is the man who was in charge of the Marine Board at that time. First testimony. I saw Captain Bachet about that time, the moment the ship struck. I came on deck. The captain was drunk. I believe the vessel was lost through the drunkenness and carelessness on behalf of the captain. Not a good start, is it? Next person, the ship struck. I knew the captain was drunk because I was listening to his conversation all the morning. Okay, not going well. I did not see the captain drink in the morning the vessel struck. In my opinion, the captain was not in a proper state to give orders. He was not sober at 5 a.m. in my opinion. Okay. This is the report from Samuel Bachet, the master. I was not drunk on the 31st of May. During the whole voyage, I was capable of giving orders and was capable of giving orders night or day. It goes further than that, of course, but I can't summarize the whole document. On the 30th of May, I was not able to take any observations. That's because of visibility. And the boatsman came down saying he could not make the light out. No land was seen until the ship struck. I was not drunk, and there was no want of skillful care on my part, only an error of judgment. So the Marine Board heard all the evidence, and I, for the sake of brevity, I did cut out a lot of different reports of his being drunk during the voyage. And so the finding of the Marine Board came down quite strongly that the report is the vessel was lost because of the wrongful act on default of Samuel Bachet, the master, in having improperly navigated and said vessel by reason of drunkenness and carelessness. And it shows here on a finding that his certificate is suspended for 12 calendar months. Just thought I'd leave with a photograph. I actually found that from the Department of Environment. It was a photograph taken at the time. You can see the centre mast is missing, which is in the report that we just read. Now, if we go back to the log of logs, Queen of Nations, there's a number of different logs that have survived. What's interesting is that not all of these sites will be easily and readily available as they were in the last example. So they do refer to other places. Sometimes there's one for the PRO South Australia. There's one for, there can be different places. I've seen the records being held by the UK at Greenwich and other places. So it might be an investigation that would take a bit of work to resolve, but the log of logs will give you a very good idea of where you can find the primary sources. As of course, as you've been taught, I've go to the second volume as well and found her again. We're going to look at now at the wreck of the Kamaruka, which was wrecked on Pedro Reef on the night of October 17, 1897. Now, this was a vessel being captained by Mr. Hersey. Now, you may remember Mr. Hersey from an earlier story on today. He's now captaining the Kamaruka, and it struck the reef on its way to Sydney. few interesting things to recommend for this. Firstly, it hit the reef at night, so I thought I'd give you a fair idea of what it might have been like. He was steaming at full speed in a calm sea near midnight and struck about 150 yards from the shore. What's interesting is that one of the masters actually came up with the idea to get the live cargo ashore, thank God, but he put lines on them so that when the pigs were swimming to shore, they swam lines to shore, which were then used, tied to a rock, to get everybody on board off safely. So the pigs saved the day. If you look at the Trove articles, the second mate is the person who was, both the second mate and the captain had to show why their certificates should not be cancelled. And that's the rock that they tied the lines to. The board found there was a wrongful act of W.O. Hersey, the master, not making proper steps to secure the safety of the vessel when the said master was under the influence of alcohol. And the wrongful act of W.O. Hersey, influence of alcohol, and William Oscar Hersey, certificate master, has been cancelled. So I think we could probably agree that alcohol and shipping don't mix from the stories that I've been bringing forward today. I thought I'd follow Mr. Hersey a little bit further. In the interest of the travelling public, we must cancel the certificate of W.O. Hersey. And then he dies in 1902, Captain O. Hersey. And that brings to the close our look at shipwrecks. Now, I wanted to finish with a bit of an overview of if today's talk, browsed many different subjects. And so I thought what I would do is now take the view that you want to look at and get a summary of what I've been talking about today on shipwrecks. And what you can do is you can go to Research A to Z, S for shipwrecks. Now on the left is a summary of all the different sections. They're just hyperlinks really. We'll look at the Colonial Secretary first. There you can see the wreck of the Stirling Castle specifically in the guide. It also mentions other records that would be interesting to other subjects. Under the Maritime Service Board, we have inquiries, which is one of the major focuses of today's talk. Notice that I'm looking down the guide, I'm checking the years that they cover, and then I can then decide whether or not to go into the records. The Marine Board, what's interesting about government, and I want you to learn, is that government changes the boards and the departments from time to time. So when they change, they usually change the rules that they work by, and then when they change the rules that they work by, they change the records they make. So under each section, you look at, well, what records were they making in that time period? In this case, it's a series of reports and decisions of inquiries, records of investigations. It doesn't seem to be the same level of record as what we've just been looking at. We look further down, the Court of Marine Inquiry eventually replaced the Marine Board, Navigation Board, Marine Services Board from 1936. So you don't need to look at our webinars and then become an expert overnight. And you can re-watch them. If they're a good webinar, I strongly recommend that because they will tend to go into details that you may want to recheck. You didn't know they were coming at first, and on reviewing, you can pick out the details. But don't forget, we have excellent guides and finding aids. And if you go into the guides, they do make you an expert on a subject. And you can look at those guides and get ideas for further research. It actually mentions the wreck of the Dunbar, by the way, which is one of the more iconic shipwrecks in Australian history and one of the reasons I chose it for today. We looked at that series there. We also have other sources relating to the Dunbar further down the page. So as I bring the